Weirdest start time in the weirdest classroom ever. But good to see everybody. My name is Dr. Mashfiqul Islam. I don't, is that how he said it? Yeah, sorry. No, but as you guys probably know, we had a little adjustment there about New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. But yeah, my name is Dr. Shamit, not Dr. Islam. I probably met most of you guys when I came in CE materials and yelled in the lab for like 30 seconds. But I'm really excited to teach this class because it's the class I normally teach. So you would have been seeing the same notes anyways. But this is the course that my professional and personal background is in. I was a geotechnical engineer before I started teaching. And honestly, it's the best class out there because it's the intro to geotech and it's a lot of fun and the lab's a lot of fun. And I'm excited to teach it. So yeah, as I mentioned, everything's going to be recorded. We'll go over the syllabus, but we're also going to get into some introductory geotechnical engineering topics today. But the real like meat of it, of course, is going to start next week. So yeah, any questions right off the bat? Who's calling? That's sweet. Okay, well, let's just get started about the Canvas page and kind of going over the syllabus like all your other professors have done this first week. The lecture is obviously not here. It's obviously not here, so just disregard all of that. But what I do want to talk about is the attendance. It is expected. Let me just make sure this is the right thing because, yeah. Okay. So you guys are juniors, almost seniors, right? So just like how your bosses and they're going to expect you to show up to work today, like, or show up to work. Same thing with this class. Like, we're going to start treating you guys like professional engineers. If you don't want to show up to class and just try to wing it, like, I don't suggest that, but like, you will not be taking points off for not showing up to class. That being said, it's being expected, but I know stuff comes up. You will get the most out of this class by showing up and asking questions because this is a different type of civil engineering class where it's not always going to be a clear-cut answer. Like geotechnical engineering, as maybe some of you guys already know, background of that is dealing with rocks and natural variability. So like it's not quite like steel, it's not quite like concrete, where like we understand the physics of it and the answers are pretty straightforward. So with this class, there is going to be a lot of give and take and also more so discussion based. So long story short, if you show up to class, that's going to be the best bang for your buck. But since it's not required to show up, I do record all the lectures and I will post them each week for you to review them. So all the PowerPoints or all my lectures will be through a PowerPoint, just like Dr. Islam did, because he used all my stuff. So it's all going to be fill in the blank kind of style, where the key things conceptually will be left blank that I will then fill in. And then also when we have example problems and going over some of the calculations, I have this really cool thing that allows me to write equations and stuff. So if you have the ability to print out the slides, then you can do that ahead of time. They will be posted a week in advance. Also, if you have a laptop or whatever that allows you to write on PDFs or anything like that, then I recommend doing that too. If you don't know already, every one of you, since you have a UNF ID, you can actually get like the special version of Adobe that allows you to write on PDFs and do all that fancy stuff too. So if you aren't already taking advantage of that, do that as well. Somebody had a question. Stop over there. What's up, Clint? So on Canvas, everything, yeah, you guys can see the Canvas page because people have already responded to it, right? Yeah, so on the Canvas page, and then one of the first things you should see like lecture notes. If you click on that, it'll pop down and there should be just this one available. Okay. Yeah. If you want, we can go over the Canvas page after in a little bit. Speaking of which, though, you guys are already all familiar, but Canvas is going to be like the home base for this course. So if you don't already have the little fancy mobile app, you can get it on Apple, and for the three of you who have Androids, you guys can also download a Canvas app. That's the best way of communicating, the best way of getting announcements if something happens and I'm running late or I need to switch class because this building is like messed up or something or condemned, then I'm going to be sending announcements through Canvas. So that's going to be the best bet for you and communication as well. Let's see, what else do we have for the lecture? So I mentioned they're going to all be recorded, but this, again, it shouldn't be a substitute for showing up to class. It's not an online class. Your exams will still be here in person. There still will be things that are discussed in class that might not be recorded, might not be placed on Canvas. So keep that in mind as a caveat. But they are going to be recorded for your review. The lectures are going to be posted each Friday. I'm going to try to do around noon-ish. I also have like 2 little kids and they get sick and I sometimes forget to post stuff. So it might not be posted exactly at noon on Friday each week. But the Tuesday and the Thursday lectures are going to be recorded. They'll be on Canvas through the YouTube studio thing. You can just scroll down and click and watch those videos for each lecture as well. Now, just to keep everybody honest and keep everybody on track, we will have weekly quizzes through Canvas that will be due on Friday at midnight. So each week, again, if you don't want to show up to class and you want to cut into happy hour and stuff between noon and midnight and completely ruin your Friday, then technically you can do that. You're just going to have to watch those 2 lectures on Friday in between that time. Again, if you show up on Tuesday and Thursday, pay attention in class, then the quizzes will be posted right after this class on Thursday. And then I would just suggest taking 20 minutes, 30 minutes, knocking it out after class, and then you don't have to worry about it. The purpose of these quizzes are just going to be like to go over those key concepts and key things that we learn each week. So they're not cumulative quizzes. There's just going to be a quiz based off of the Tuesday and the Thursday lecture. They're open notes. They will be calculation based. I do suggest working individually because these are going to be the best gauge for your understanding when it comes test time. So if you work with a buddy or you just chat GPT everything, you'll get the answer. You'll get 100% on something that's worth 10% of your grade. But at the end of the day, you're going to be doing yourself a discredit by not learning the material that is going to be on your exam. So use those as a metric of understanding. If there's something and you're like, shoot, I got like a 4 on this quiz, I don't know what we're talking about with these quiz questions, like then that would be a good time to come to me and be like, hey, can we go over this in more detail? The stuff you see on the quiz, you will most likely see on the exam. So keep that in mind. All the exams will be held in person, which will be fun because the last 2 times I've taught this class, I've had 2 kid births that have lined up in the middle of it. So we've had to like postpone an exam, but all of them here, unless something crazy happens, will be all in person. They'll be in this class. They'll be within the time of the classroom. And they are all, just giving you a heads up, they're all going to be structured towards the FE exam. You guys, is that on y'all's radar yet? The fundamental engineering exam? Cool. If you're not shaking your head, yes, you should be by the end of the semester. That's going to be the one thing that most employers are going to be looking at to have already secured by the time you graduate. And that'll set you up so that you can focus on your PE shortly after you graduate. So yeah, there's going to be sections of multiple choice, sections of true and false. Bulk of it is going to be multiple choice, and I am going to be structuring it following an FE, which means, just to be honest, I'm going to be trying to trick you a lot on these things because that's what the FE does, you know. So paying attention of units, paying attention of assumptions is going to be a key thing through these exams and through the homework and through the example problems in class. You guys will hopefully be exposed to some of those things that like the people who write the FE exam are trying to trick you with and stump you on. Any questions on lecture and stuff right now? Sweet. By the way, too, if you have any questions, like while I'm talking, like please just raise your hand and I'll get to you after I'm done with each sentence, I guess. All right, so you guys know that this section also has a laboratory associated with it, which honestly I think is for the best, even though it can be a headache sometimes. Coming in on an extra time, but it really puts to practice the things that we learn in the lecture. So the laboratory is always going to be supplementary to the lecture. So what we'll do is we'll go over it in class, and hopefully within that week or the next week, we're actually going to be applying it in the lab section. So right now, just giving you a heads up, everything will be through the one Canvas page. So you might have like an unpublished laboratory section of CEG3011. I'm never going to publish that one. I'm just going to include everything. It helps grading a lot easier in that one thing. There's 3 sections of lab sections. I know they have like crazy course numbers, but do these all look correct here? Okay, yeah. The timing of it is all crazy. But it looks like each class usually has about like 10 to like 12 or so students enrolled in each one. So that's good. So as part of this, and just with the craziness of everything, the lab sections, we had to delay it 1 week, but that's fine. You'll see in the syllabus, we are not starting our lab sections until the 22nd. But again, they're always going to be supplementary. They're also always going to be following an ASTM. So ASTM is American Society of Testing Materials. That's what like the real engineers will be using in the workplace. So it's a good complement to get you started into like looking at what you're going to be covering in the real world. You know, of course, we take a lot of shortcuts because we are students and we're not getting paid as real engineers. So the purpose of these lab reports is for exposure, not necessarily completeness, but we'll go over each one in the middle of that. So some of the rules associated with the laboratory section. So there's no, so lab attendance is very important. This is a rule set by, you know, just the CBA or whatever, the people on the 4th floor here. If you miss more than one absence on it, and there's small lab sections, so we can tell when people are not at it, then that's an automatic fail for the lab section. That's part of our ABET accreditation. Attendance is very important for that. So if you look at the syllabus, you'll see when those dates are. If you know you have something on that time and you need to switch it for just one time, like that's fine, we can work around it, but you still need to be proactive and like letting us know if you're unable to attend one of these lab sections. And I'm sure Dr. Islam went over that for the CE materials too. It's definitely one of these things for this class, it's just as important. So for teaching your laboratory section, we have Mr. Joseph Tarimo. He's a graduate student who has background in lab work. If you want to introduce yourself real quick, he's going to be the TA for you guys this semester.
Hello everyone, meet you. As Professor Ryan said, I'll be taking you guys to lab sessions. Love to have you guys attend. All of you. As long as you're very important, especially when you go there.
Sweet. Yeah. Cool. Thanks. So yeah, super solid. He has experience working with a lot of AASHTO tests and in the laboratory and the experience too. So between us, like, and also we'll do some other geotech site visits. Hopefully by the end of this, you see a lot of the actual laboratory and geotechnical principles that, you know, if you decide to work in this field, you're going to be doing your first few years anyways. So it's a good lab, and it really does help understand the material here. All right, as far as references go and textbooks, there is no like required textbook for this class. There is, as in a lot of your civil engineering courses, you know, there's thousands of textbooks out there. And they all kind of say the same thing. Geotechnical engineering, the two that I'm going to be taking a lot of our content from is this one by Jean-Louis Briand, Unsaturated and Saturated Soil. This one you can actually get for free through the UNF library as a digital version. So I may need to check that link, but if you just Google that through the UNF library, you can download some of those things there. Another really solid one that I'm going to be getting content from here is the Introduction to Geotechnical Engineering by Holtz and Kovacs. This is one of the most like fundamental, easy reading ones. If you're interested in geotechnical engineering at all, like I feel like geotech is the last discipline that still uses a textbook. Like every engineer I know working still like will have a textbook here. So just pick one of these up on Amazon, like especially this one here on the left. It's like $30. It's worth the investment if you want to go in that field. All that said, though, I will be posting at the beginning of each lecture where the chapters are, the content that I'm taking, or like, you know, the material that we're covering. But also you guys know how to use Google and Control F and stuff on PDF, so you can find it yourself most likely. So not recommended or not required, but are recommended. This is all stuff from the syllabus. So you'll see we have 3 exams, exam 1, midterm, final. They are non-cumulative, but there are there are concepts that we'll learn week 1 that will be, you know, filtered through each one, but they are all standalone exams. Your final will just be based off of like the certain weeks in the end. You can see the lab reports will make up 20% each week. With each associated lab, you will be submitting a professional style report. And then those quizzes and the homeworks will be, make up another 25%. I don't do plus and minus grading. Does anybody like plus and minus grading? Okay, I figured. I don't know anyone who actually likes that, but if you do want a plus or minus grade, let me know. I can give you one if you need a little gold star or something. All right, homework is we will have only 4 or 5 homework assignments. Now, what I'm going to say right off the bat, geotechnical engineering, it's one of those again where like you guys are expected to make mistakes because a lot of times there is no truly right answer. What I'm looking for is the methodology and the idea of thinking behind it. So with the homeworks, I'm going to be grading them as like a formative assignment, meaning I'm grading for professionalism and completeness and promptness. So a lot of times you might get a 10 on a homework assignment, and then it's your job to actually go through and actually check your answers to make sure that they're correct, or they follow the correct methodology. So just keep that in mind. Everything is through Canvas. I make notes, I do annotation. If there's something like completely bogus wrong, then I'll make sure to send you a little message being like, hey, check number 2, this is completely wrong, that kind of thing. But please just keep that in mind. Like once you post your homework, like still review my notes and review like my responses after I grade it each time. This is the area where I'm going to start being much more strict than if I were maybe you experienced in CE materials or mechanics and materials if you had me in that class. The format and the promptness for homeworks is going to be very important. As part of a geotechnical engineer, your main thing that you do as a consultant is submitting an engineering report. So making sure that your client knows what your justification is for your solution and has a clear line of thought through you reading a report is really important. This is our version of communication. This is how engineers get paid. So making sure that it's clear, concise, and professional is important. I will upload some go-bys of homework assignments, like some super solid ones and some not so good ones, just so you can get an understanding of it. I would prefer typed or some type of digital written. But if you want, you can write it out on like white paper and then scan it in as well. Everything will be digitally submitted. So if you don't have Cam Scanner or again, that Adobe, there's like Adobe Scan that you can get with your UNF account. That's a good app. I would recommend getting that or just going to Goodwill and buying an actual old scanner from like the 90s. That works too. Quinn, you have a question again on this? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, homeworks are the best gauge for what to expect for the exam too, when it comes to the actual like numerical answers. I'd mentioned it's gonna be FE style, but I don't want to leave you guys hanging high and dry with just a multiple choice exam. So there will be some questions at the end to test and like that are more numerical right out, so I can see your thinking behind it. So this is the late policy I'm going to go with. Now that we submit through Canvas, it's really nice because it'll tell me like to like 5 decimal places how late your assignment is. So if it's within the next day, it will be 15% off automatically, 20 to 48 hours, 25%. And then once it's past 28 or 48 hours, that should be a 48 there, then 50% off. So what that means is like maybe you did forget an assignment and it's been a few weeks later and stuff. Like it's still worth submitting something because you can still get some points and everything. I don't curve grades at all. I let Excel figure everything out. There's plenty of opportunities for extra credit. So, any points might help at the end of the semester. So please don't just like give up on an assignment just because you're a few days late on it. This is just a general rule of thumb. Normally the baseline for non-professional format will be 20 to 50% off. The first one, obviously, I'll be a lot more lenient on, and I'll provide comments and a little bit more insight if there's a formatting issue that I see. Okay, my office is building 4, room 1213. My office hours are right there. That's just something we have to put. My best thing is email or Microsoft Teams. You can send me a message. We can meet whenever. I will ask you guys to please include the CEG3011 in the subject line. I remember my professors always asking me that, or like asking us to do that. And I was like, it's stupid, it's email, like you can just figure it out. But honestly, it does help because we do get like 10,000 emails a day. And usually what I try to do at the end of each day is just Control F and find the ones to the class to make sure I answer each one. So if you put CEG3011 in that, then I'll just help me bump up the priority and make sure that I'm responding frequently. And as with this class, as with any professional, academic setting, the earlier on you communicate, the better. Like if you're struggling in something, if you know you're going to be absent, if you're having issues with like your lab group or something, like bring it out to the light, like let me know about it earlier so we can be proactive rather than reactive on that. So that's just the kind of the thing I want to reiterate there. All right, one of the main goals of this class and the things that we'll be covering here, if you're not familiar with the FE-NCES, the geotechnical engineering, like little topics, for your FE exam, the Fundamental of Engineering exam, which I highly recommend everybody taking before you graduate. There will be 10 to 15 questions strictly on geotechnical engineering, and these are some of the lists here. Now, just due to the nature of like the timing of this class, a lot of these things at the end, we're not going to be able to cover. We'll kind of cover like more broadly conceptually, but these first 5 or 6 points right here, this is going to be the main thing we're going to be focusing on in this class. So just spoiler alert and kind of like pushing, like definitely take advanced design analysis foundations with me next year. I would recommend doing that so you get the whole holistic picture of that. Part of the other interesting things, like just more broad about geotechnical engineering, is understanding how diverse it is and how it changes from site to site or location to location too. Anybody want to guess what this map is besides something you may have looked in like Spencer's Gifts? What's up?
Different types of dirt and soil across the
yeah, this is a geologic map, kind of just with colors representing there. And this is only the superficial geology as well. So like this is telling us that based off of how the continent is formed and just the United States here, like each little color represents a different type of superficial, meaning at the surface, geologic conditions. So as you can imagine here, like we're going to be teaching a lot of stuff because we're in Florida. We're going to be dealing a lot and like presenting geotechnical issues as if you were working here in Florida. But I mean, up here in this area here, it's all a crazy color because they had a bunch of glaciers and so the soil is completely different. It's been loaded. It's just a different composition. Out here in the West, we have a lot of evaporation, dried lakes, so the soil's out completely different. Of course, California has its own problems and issues that you guys have probably seen in the news too. So like that being said, like keep that in mind, like a lot of this class is going to be presented to make you think on like a broader picture. We'll be talking about the principles and the actual design for Florida soils because that's where we are. But just keep that in mind, like if you get bored of being a geotechnical engineer here in Florida, you can just move to any other state with a different color. You'll have different issues, you'll have different problems that you'll have to tackle. And it's basically like a different, like same principles, but you're applying it to a different thing. So this is our tentative schedule for the class. This is the last page of the syllabus. If you should be able to download it, I put it in an announcement. I also made it as a link too. And you can kind of see some of the things that we are going to be covering. This first section here, we're just going to be spending a lot of time on soil composition and talking about how soil in Florida differs from Florida in the Northeast, or soil in the Northeast differs in Minnesota, and all these things. So the first few weeks will be heavy on the conceptual, and then we'll start getting into more of the application in weeks 6 and 10, and then more of the niche Florida issues here when we talk about permeability and seepage, problematic soils that we have in Florida, like sinkholes and organic soils, as well as some of the in-situ testing, and then some foundations there. So you'll see these highlighted dates here are our exam dates. You will never have a lab section during your exam. So that's hopefully helpful. But you'll also see the lab sections are kind of color coordinated, like weeks 1 through 5. That's what will be on your exam 1. Weeks 6 through 10 will be exam 2, and then 12 through 16 will be on your exam 3. I should say exam 3 at the bottom. Some other key dates here, obviously, I'm sure everybody already knows when spring break is, but also I'll be traveling for a few conferences on the week leading up to spring break. So some of these will be lecture videos where we won't have an in-class like meeting, I will just post a lecture, recorded lecture at the time of your class, so you can still sit and watch it, and you can keep your regular schedule and regular like rhythm of learning there. But yeah, you can see our assignment on the right-hand side. You can see, I will fill that in whenever we start having the assignment dates and everything, but you can see your lab schedule. We'll start that on January 22nd. And then we have it spaced out, and we might have to adjust that accordingly. We have some buffers just because, again, I want the labs to be supplementary, like after the fact of when we learn the content here in the classroom. All right, any questions on schedule, Canvas, life, geotech, finances? Okay, cool. All right, just want to share a little bit about myself too, for the ones who I haven't had a chance to meet yet. My last name is Shamit. It's 2 curse words put together, pretty helpful. Have 2 little kids, my wife, Cody, Cohen and Otto. So all this is new, all this fun gray hair is new since they were both born. I went to school at UCF. I'm originally from Brevard County in Palm Bay. Was there for a solid decade, so I saw the good, bad, ugly of college football during that time. During that time too, I worked at a geotechnical consultant. There's actually an office here in Jacksonville, Terracon Engineering Consultants. That's an old logo, so maybe you guys are familiar. You've seen them around or seen their trucks around. It was a really cool opportunity. I worked mainly on federal highways and the foundations of those. So has anyone driven through Orlando, I-4 Ultimate, or the First Coast Expressway, or the Kaiba Parkway? Yeah, so scary. I designed all those bridges foundations, so good luck. No, but so it was really fun to see that animal and just learn about the problematic soils and just the big picture of these huge, heavy civil projects. Got a chance to live and do a lot of drilling too. So we lived out on this barge in the middle of Tampa Bay for 2 weeks. That was like right after I got married, so that was not fun. But that was for the new Gandy Bridge that they're now under constructing right now. And that was in 2017. So you can see geotechs are kind of the first people in, and then the construction occurs 3 or 4 years later. So a lot of subsurface exploration, a lot of field work, which is why I personally love this, because again, it's like, you know, you're out in the field, you're collecting soil samples, you're in the lab, you're doing the analysis, and then you do all the math and stuff. So you see where it came from, and you see the original, like the vision of what you're designing ahead of time. I also worked at Florida Tech, Go Panthers, if anybody's from Brevard County. Nobody's nodding, and nobody's from that area. And then of course, came here at UNF in Jacksonville. Love it up here. Moved in 2020 during the pandemic, which was nice compared to Orlando for pandemic stuff, that's for sure. I'm very heavily involved with ASCE. I'm going to be plugging this like crazy, so just get ready. Like my goal is just everybody getting involved with ASCE, not only the student branch here, but also the Florida section. Jacksonville is super unique because when you graduate, you can actually stay here, right? Like, so like you don't have to like go move to Miami or some major metropolitan. The market here is nuts. Like you guys are going to have like 5 or 6 job offers if you don't already by the time you graduate. So that's really cool, because like the relationships and all the networking that happens here in the classroom, the studying, the whatever, like you and your peers, like 5, 6 years later, like once you graduate, you guys are going to be helping each other get jobs and get bids. And, you know, somebody might work for the city and who needs to hire an engineer, and then boom, you have your engineering firm, you know. And then 10 years from then, like you guys are all going to be executives and like making business decisions. And like, so all that being said, like join these networks here and build those relationships right now, because like everyone sticks around and you're going to help each other out like in the future whenever you start making these big decisions and businesses and stuff. So ASC is a great branch for that. Specifically too, I'm heavily involved in the Geo Institute of ASCE, which is really fun because it connects all geo professionals from throughout the world there. So there's also Structural Institute, there's Transportation Institute. Like I would definitely recommend it, choosing one of these professional organizations to join in your specific discipline. Like if you want to do environmental, whatever, it just helps narrow the understanding, and it makes it a lot more fun, to be honest too, because then you put like people instead of just like jobs there. I also had a chance to work with ETM over the summer, as well as this summer. If you're not familiar with them, England, Timms, and Miller. Where's Jackson? Jackson. I know we have a few, probably a lot of you guys may have already know about ETM, but they're a land development firm as well as transportation, and they'll have lots of opportunities to come and meet you guys as well. Really helped kind of get a different aspect of what the bigger picture of engineering is and how geotech fits into that. So that was a lot of fun. And my wife and I are also members at Church of 1122 in Arlington. If anybody likes to go there or sees us there, feel free to help us hold our kids and chase them down. All right. So in the last, how much time do we have? An hour or so. I want to cover a little bit and get into the introduction side of geotechnical engineering. So this will be more so conceptual just to kind of set the stage for the class. If you didn't print out these notes, it's okay. I will post these completed lecture shells, like a filled out one. I'll post it after class as soon as I'm done drawing on it and stuff. So don't feel like you need to write in it or try to memorize all this stuff right now. But just keep that in mind. Moving forward, I will not post the the completed lecture shells. All right, so you guys all live in Jacksonville. You guys know who this guy is, right? Duval, yeah. All right, so we're getting a brand new stadium, which is kind of cool, right? And they're already starting to do downtown differently and stuff. So I just want to think start the conversation here. So before we decide to build this giant stadium of the future, like what do we need to know? What needs to happen? And like, what are the pieces that need to fall into place?
You need to know what the soil is like.
Okay, yeah. Soil type / just subsurface, right? Yeah. Traffic. What about traffic? Yeah, urban design. Yeah, that's definitely something that is important and I'm interested in because it seems like we are just constantly redoing or undoing the things that we thought were a good idea. Jackson. Drainage. Yeah, that's huge. Downtown, right? I mean, and everywhere in Florida. What's up, Mikey?
Historical like significance of the area, whether they buried people there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just gonna keep that as like history, right? Yeah. That's a good one. And also something that like is pretty cool because most of the time in Florida, we are doing a green space development, right? But like in these urban pockets, Jacksonville and Orlando and like some of these other cities, like, you know, I'm sure you guys have done city stuff before. Like apparently computers didn't exist until 1990 or 1999 or something. And so if you want to try to get documentation of what's underground or what's at that site, like from like a city or municipality standpoint, like there's no information. So you have to like actually go and try to piece together some things. Any other ideas? We hit a lot of them here, but yeah, that's a big one. Again, that's like the subsurface, but that's huge. Like utility, how is it going to fit together, right? Like we're adding this new thing. We already have a grid of stuff going. Like how can we connect it? How can we go into this? A few of the other things is like climate / changes over time. That's a big thing too, that a lot of times it's hard to quantify and hard to decide, but like that's, I mean, I've been wanting to teach a class like this for a long time, but you'll see a lot of times, and I mentioned this before, like it seems like civil engineers, like we're now at a point where we're redoing a lot of things that we thought were good ideas in the 60s, right? Like in engineering, all these engineering feats of the 60s and 70s, and now we're like, oh crap, this was a bad idea, or we're not using it this way anymore. And so a lot of money is being poured out into deconstructing something. If you're familiar with downtown at all, like their sunlighting or their exposing the natural waterway of McCoy's Creek over in the Brooklyn side of the neighborhood. And like in the 50s and 60s, they buried it. And that was like a genius idea. They were like, this is awesome. Now we can build all this stuff and just run the creek underground. And engineers were super stoked about it. And now we're spending like millions of dollars undoing all of that stuff. So like, how do we consider that now? Like, how can we think about 20, 30 years from the future? How is this neighborhood, how are the demands of the population going to change here? So these are all things, and hopefully like I want you guys like in this class as well as in classes in the future, like think about this holistically. Like the goal of a civil engineer is to develop infrastructure that betters society. So when you're talking about transportation, how does that fill with the history of the area, the demands of the area? When we're talking about geotechnical engineering, how does that work with the drainage and obviously the subsurface investigation and the utility plans? So like thinking holistically will help kind of paint a picture and get a little bit more out of each class. When we talk about specifically geotechnical engineers, what we're looking at is design of bridges, roadways, or all of these things being utilities. All of this is designed or constructed on like the Earth's crust. So the geotechnical engineer is just a fancy word for a science that explains the mechanics of soil and rock and its relationship to the design, construction, and the operation of the engineering projects. And I say these three stages because geotechnical engineering is involved in that whole cradle to grave. As I mentioned, like you're going to be the first person there drilling holes and actually getting soil samples, doing subsurface investigation. You're going to be doing the design work. And then also during the construction, you're going to be there checking everything. So for geotechnical engineering, what we want to do is we want to make these design decisions for the public based off of safety and the dollar signs. So what you'll see in this class, and especially in foundation design and in any development, really, like we can go all out, super expensive design, or we can just shortchange it and potentially have issues. There's a long-term cycle that we have to think about. The dollars up front versus the dollars potentially each year to repair. And nothing is more important than in subsurface investigation or foundation design. Because if you think about it, like whatever, this building, yeah, okay, if we need to repair, like they're doing across the pond there, if we need to repair that and, redo some of the columns or maybe the beams are a little out of whack and reinforce those, all of that is above ground. So like, you have to close the building for a semester and tape it off and make it a little bit harder to get to Starbucks, but at least it's possible and not too expensive. If we mess up with a foundation or we're not considering potential future additions, like everything is underground already. Like it is going to cost so much more to mobilize, to close the building, to excavate, to change the foundation once it's in there. So you have to be thinking a little bit more forward in advance. So some of the things that geotechnical engineers are going to be working on, obviously I'd mentioned this, foundations of structures are a huge one. So this column right there in the corner, it's transferring all of the structural load. It is sitting on some type of foundation that is then transferring the soil or transferring the loads from this structure safely through the soil such that it's not collapsing or settling at an extreme rate. But what are some of the other things? You can see some pictures here. What are some other things that geotechnical engineers might need or might be charged with for designing? You can just say it. Drainage. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so seepage or drainage. What specific like aspect do you think of that? Like infrastructure, like what type of infrastructure uses or needs to design against drainage?
Roadways, especially to know how drain.
Mhm. Yeah.
Big buildings like this have the drainage.
Yeah, geotechnical engineers like stormwater ponds, or detention ponds, like stuff if you've taken hydraulics yet or any of those classes, like the geotechnical engineer will have a hand in designing that and by determining the permeability. A lot of other things too, like it's a weird word, but dikes and dams. So like controlling flooding, anybody from Miami or something, all of those flood mitigation dams and levees down there by Lake Okeechobee. Those are all geotechnical like designs. Yeah. Josh. Yeah, landfills are a huge one too. Yeah, retaining walls. Mm-hmm. Yeah, slopes, any type of like man-made slope, right? Like any type of slope, any embankment. We'll talk about this and you'll see, like, hopefully by the end of this class too, you'll realize like how many geotechnical engineering structures you drive by on your day-to-day basis. What? Huge, yeah. Tunnels, not so much in Florida yet, even though we can build full tunnels in Florida. We just don't need to yet, I guess. Yeah, tunnels. What was the other one I was gonna say? Oh yeah, excavations. Like this picture down here for basements and everything. You know, yeah, roadway. That's one too. Subgrade of what roadway, making sure that the subbase, the soil, like the first thing we're putting on is going to be strong enough and drain strong enough as well too. So a lot of this is what we look at is like a load transfer. So that's one of the main mechanisms that we're looking at. Like, is the car, is the structure, is the dam, is it actually going to stay put, or is it going to sink into the ground or potentially tilt? So load transfer is a big one. But what you see here too, a lot of this does involve water and seepage. What we'll see is like that's kind of the behind the scenes of geotechnical engineering. You're going to be dealing a lot more with hydraulics and a lot more with how the water can change the strength and the composition of our soil. Because I mean, it's everywhere, right? There's like, unless you're out west, like anytime you dig, you're going to hit water eventually. You're going to hit the water table, or it's going to be rainy. Like, it's just something that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So especially when it comes to load transfer, if you remember this word here, mechanics, do you guys remember what that like word means in terms from like strength of materials or something?
Something works.
Yeah, how something works. Like from an engineering standpoint, what we're doing is we are setting a mathematical relationship to a physical phenomenon. So we see concrete and it's like, oh, we're bending it until it breaks. That's something that we observe. That's a physical phenomenon. We're using mathematics to help us define and estimate that. So same thing with steel, same thing with soil too. We're going to be looking a lot at the mechanics of soil and rock, which is important because that helps us define the strength of it. So what we'll see though, and just again, spoiler for the whole rest of the semester, like unlike steel where it's pretty easy, or not easy, but there's only a few ways steel can yield or can fail. Or unlike concrete where like you have shearing or potentially like tension failure in concrete. Like in soil, there's at least two. No, there's a lot of ways that soil can fail. So the hard part at the beginning is defining which one of the most probable ways of failure will occur in soil. All right, role of geotech real quick. I'll go through these really quickly. The big thing we need to remember with geotech is we are dealing with natural material. So there's always going to be variability. There's always going to be anomalies. There's always going to be something that we didn't account for. So for the first role that we would do, and that we've kind of talked about, the role of the geotech, the first role is to investigate the site conditions. And so we're looking at understanding the subsurface conditions, understanding what type of design parameters might be necessary. So we need to think always negative. How might this fail? Whatever this is, whatever we're building, how might this building fail? How might this tunnel fail? How might this dam fail? And we always need to consider the risk of anomalies. So this means we need to look very strongly into the history of the area. A lot of geotechnical engineering is learning from previous mistakes. Geotechnical engineering has only been a defined branch of engineering since the 50s. So like still relatively in the grand scheme of things, it's a young like discipline of civil engineering. So a lot of it is still learning. A lot of it is still unknown. The research like avenues are still going, and we're still making new strides in this industry. And a lot of the technology is still being increased as well. So the first role is to do that due diligence from the geotech standpoint, understanding the history of the area, how might the soil fail, and then doing a robust subsurface investigation. And this is where we can get from like cheap out, super, just send an intern out there to investigate, or we can get super, super expensive. This is where the consultant comes into it. You need to work with your client. You need to work with the property owner. You need to work with the developer to work out a plan and say like, well, what is your risk tolerance? Like, how much cash are you carrying for certain like insurance or liability? Like, how much can we actually afford to do a subsurface investigation? So once we do that, then the geotechnical engineer will do the whole design stage. And this is where a lot of it will overlap and work with the structural engineer as well as the owner. Right. So like if you're designing this building, maybe like this building, they're not entirely sure how many floors they want, what the loading on each floor is going to be. So the geotechnical engineer may need to wait for the structural engineer to finish all of his or her calculations so we can know the column loading and the column spacing so we can design our foundation accordingly. In some cases, if you're designing and like the property owner is like, hey, I really want to develop this certain piece of property, then maybe the geotechnical engineer is the one telling the structural engineer what the limitations are based off of the soil. If it's a swamp, you're like, hey, sorry, structural engineer, like we cannot construct a certain loading of a column in this area just because of our physical limitations. So after the design stage, though, of course, then we're involved with the construction aspects, which is honestly, in my opinion, the best part, because then you see the site being developed from nothing, you see the numbers behind it, and then also you get a chance to work and see the construction occurring. And this is a really important part of geotechnical engineering because of this right here. We are dealing with natural material. We are doing our design based off of a few holes drilled into the ground, spaced out every 100 feet. A lot of stuff is going to be different between those 2 points. So changes will happen. And when those happen, you need to be proactive with the owner and the land developer and be out there too to make sure that the construction crew is being held accountable. If anybody's done any type of like construction work, whether it be like, installing sprinklers or bathroom remodeling, a lot of construction companies are just, time is money. They want to like get the product. And especially since geotechnical engineering, a lot of it is underground. It's easy to cover up the mistakes. So inspection is a big aspect when it comes to geotechnical, when it comes to foundation design and everything. Just kind of anecdotally, that was one of the coolest parts for I-4 Ultimate. If you're familiar with downtown, there's this one Lake Ivanhoe just north of downtown in Orlando. And they redid and added like 4 bridges on I-4 in that area. And we were driving pipe piles, so 24-inch pipes into the ground so they could put the foundation of the bridges on it. And that lake is so old and it's so deep and there's a lot of organic and muck in it that a few times, twice, the piles actually, when they were drilling, it hit a soft spot and it just like sunk into and disappeared. And these are 200 feet long piles. So next time you're driving over I-4 in that area, there's 200-foot long pipes that are just buried underground someplace that nobody knows where they are. But like, so when that occurs, the construction, the guy working the pile drive will just like kind of look over, and it's up to the engineer to like make a decision quickly. Like, do we want to try to like redesign that bent, or is it worth trying to splice on another pile even though it just sunk down to the ground? So a lot of changes will happen and things that we won't account for, and we'll show a lot of case histories through this class. All right, this is just a little cartoon of kind of like a typical geotechnical engineering project. I just want to go through it. You guys kind of get the gist of it here. This is a green space development. This is your ideal, your picture perfect landscape here. Wawa wants to come in, or somebody wants to come in and do a brand new building. So the first thing that we do is the landowner's like, hey, I have investors. I got the okay from corporate. We want to build this building in this section. We already got our permits from ETM and everybody, we're all good to go. So what we're going to do first is hire a geotechnical engineer to do this initial site investigation. Now, sometimes this could happen even before the landowner buys the property, because maybe they don't know what this area is about, and maybe they want to just check and verify that what they plan to construct actually is okay to construct there. So like a good example of this was like for the First Coast Expressway over in Green Cove Springs, there's that golf course that now is a highway. I was working with the drillers with Terracon during that time, and it was before the city owned, or sorry, the state owned that golf course. And the golf company was like, we're not shutting down the golf course for you guys when you're drilling. Like, we still need to make money. So we literally had to like drill. We had to bring these trucks out there and like, you know, we set up these bunker or like plates. So just in case somebody like hit a splice on, you know, hole number 4 or whatever, it wouldn't like hit us while we were drilling. So a lot of times you're in there while the other stuff is going on before even anything is occurring. So the goal is you do this strategically, and we'll talk about the different types of testing, the different types of drilling. But the goal is to do something called stratifying. Stratifying. It's a type of guitar. I think, I don't remember what, but it's basically assigning subsurface layers and getting an idea of what the subsurface conditions are. And this is where we have to rely on a lot of geologic information. So like based off of these single points of drilling, then we are going to paint a picture of how the subsurface conditions change or variable throughout our site. So like maybe we hit a layer of sand and then a layer of clay and a layer of rock. This is very common in Florida. Part of that then would be assigning strength parameters. So all these fun things here, these are all things we're going to learn throughout this semester. These are very similar to compressive strength of concrete, like, or the yielding stress of steel, you know, like the things that allow us to make the design equations and the mechanics behind it. But it just so happens that for geotech, we have a bunch of different considerations. So we have friction angle, Young's modulus, bulk density, different compressible things. For rock, you have completely different ones too. So we'll go over all of these things, but you want to stratify, then you want to set the design parameters. And then like you need to consider some other potential like site things, like maybe we need to excavate to build or to change like a hilly area or to build like a underground parking garage. So what are the best types of retaining walls that we can cover or we can design? And we'll go over those too. You know, are we doing something like this that's very deep and needs a lot of dewatering, and you have these different structural anchors? We need to make sure the soil isn't collapsing, and we also need to make sure that the structural aspects of these walls are not collapsing. Maybe to save money, we can do like it here and only do concrete for one section and then do wood for a different section, you know, and save the owner a certain amount of money. What is the spacing of these piles? Maybe we can cut out the amount of pile that we need to drive. Like driving one of these piles could be upwards of like $30,000. So if we can cut 10 of those out, we just saved the contractor, or we just saved the client a lot of money. So thinking about what type of retaining wall we have, a lot of this we don't have in Florida. What we do have are these beautiful things. Oh yeah. Does anyone know the name of these things? Yeah, MSC, mechanically stabilized earth walls. They're everywhere. We love it here in Florida. But these are a type of retaining structure that geotechnical engineers have to design. And it's one of the cheaper things because it's all held up by soil. There's no concrete behind it. There's nothing fancy. We take nice clean sand and we compact it and we put these strips in between it and it holds it up, and we can hold up highways and all this important stuff. So maybe this is our design that we're going to go with instead of something like this that's much more expensive. So discerning and deciding what type is going to be best for an excavation. So the next thing we might need to know is like, what are we going to put this foundation on? Are we going to use a shallow foundation, like something like this, that this column is most likely feeding into? It's basically like a boot. You know, like we've all lived in Florida. We've all probably walked in a swamp before, or know somebody who has. Like, if you're not wearing the right kind of boots or shoes, there's sometimes you're just going to sink straight into it. So the same thing with buildings. Like if we were to just put this column load and just place the column right on the soil, that column is going to want to punch or sink into the ground. So we need to give it a footprint and distribute the load across a certain area. So this is called the bearing pressure. So the pressure that is applied to the soil. And then what we compare it against is the bearing capacity, or the strength that that soil can hold up. So it's very easy math when we boil it down to it. We're looking at the pressure or the applied load. Does it exceed the capacity of that soil. So we've all seen examples of this in sand at the beach. It all depends on the type of soil first and foremost. Like you weigh the same, but walking on some certain areas or the footprint might change how that soil reacts to you stepping on it. So maybe we can't put it on a shallow foundation and we need to put it on a pile. So this does basically the same thing, but it distributes the load vertically through the soil rather than horizontally through the soil. This is used for highways and a lot of bridges and stuff and a lot of high like value structures. It's a lot more expensive and it's a lot more permanent too, right? So like, I mean, once these are drilled into the ground or once these are driven into the ground, we're most likely, hopefully not having to pull them out for any reason. So we need to ensure that our first design is correct, because once they're there, they're there. So let's say we put this on a pile or something, and like the Wawa Corporation is super stoked and they're super happy. One of the other things we need to consider though is the nearby utilities. Like a lot of times we are not constructing in a beautiful like desktop background green space. We might have a body of water nearby. There might be a metro tunnel nearby. In Florida, there might be some type of loose soil or a cavity underground, a sinkhole. Obviously, that has very bad consequences if we are not catching these problematic soil conditions ahead of time and being proactive in repair. Anyone who's lived in Orlando or lived in Florida for more than like 5 years, you've probably seen these in the news. May comes along, a lot of rain will trigger these sinkholes, and then you have big devastating issues like this. Let's say like we designed it a little wrong. Maybe we miscalculated the thickness of this clay layer or missed a certain like part of it. Like we could cause tilting. We could cause certain aspect of like differential settlement. Of course, like I'm sure we're familiar with these issues before. The engineer who designed Leaning Tower of Pisa is super lucky because he became famous for it. But nowadays, if you design something that tilts, you will not become famous and it will not be a landmark. So we are trying to avoid this by making sure that our subsurface investigation, our geotech work is good ahead of time. So there's a lot of interesting types of design failures. And throughout this class, we'll be sharing a lot of these case histories, because anytime we have something happen in the geotech space where failure occurs, like the community needs to learn about it. So in areas of earthquake, a big one was this type of liquefaction, which is when an earthquake occurs in saturated sand, and all these words don't mean anything right now, but by the end of the semester, you'll know it. And the soil, whenever the earthquake is occurring, it behaves like liquid. It's pretty crazy. And so when it behaves like a liquid, obviously the strength goes out the window and it can fail in a pretty drastic way. So a lot of this is like, we learned this in 1964. So, I mean, you know, my dad was born that year, like probably a lot of your parents may have been alive during that time. Like this is still relatively young, like knowledge of types of geotechnical failures. We don't have this issue in Florida, but a lot of rock slides and a lot of slope failures we've mentioned. And a lot of our transportation infrastructure is situated around this. So usually these slope failures don't occur just on a nice, bright, sunny day. Normally it's going to be a large rain event or some other type of event where maybe people need to evacuate and use this road. So, you know, it's not just like you can just close this road and be fine for a week. A lot of times we need to keep that into consideration and design accordingly to ensure that we go against this. So if you've driven up in Georgia or North Carolina, you've probably seen these. This is a way of ensuring that we design against this type of failure. Rock nails, which is just these giant bolts that are grouted into the ground to retain and hold back any potential failure. This is a good example, actually. This is one that they showed us of understanding the importance of seepage and water flow. So this is a construction site in Dubai. I don't know what river it's on, but this is a good excavation. You know, they have a lot of these braces. They're starting to excavate. They're almost done. They're like ready to maybe pour the foundation in. And it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but you may notice just one little thing down here. There's a little bit of water peeking through and seeping through. And what you can't see also is they put a pump. They installed a pump right here. And so they're like, all right, we're good. If we can just control this, yeah, water's coming into our site, but as long as we are able to pump it out accordingly, then we'll be okay. But what we know about water is oftentimes moving water produces what? Force, which causes these little sand particles to what? Erode. They erode away, right? And then the more water flows through, the more erosion occurs. The more erosion occurs, the more water flows through, the higher the flow rates. And then it's a very progressive, like exponential case. So we have this one little seepage issue here that could have just been a subsurface investigation issue. It could have been a construction issue. It could have been maybe the engineer just miscalculated the seepage and wasn't able to design this pump accordingly. But you can see what that seepage issue, that small little issue, can occur is a beautiful lake now that you have to pump out and redesign everything. So like these small little mistakes, these small little things that you may be crossing all of your things when it comes to geotechnical engineering and foundation design, these are all scaled up to massive consequences. And that's why we need to consider this. A similar thing here too, like remembering that, like, yes, 90% of your project could be completed and perfect, but if there's 1% or just 10% of it that fails, then oftentimes the whole thing does. So this is a good case history up in Green Bay where they designed every single pile, every single bridge bent foundation perfectly. They miss one that potentially settles even just a few inches. And then of course you can't keep the bridge open. You have to keep everything closed. You have to fix this, especially once after it's all complete. It can be very expensive to try to mitigate and fix. So what we're going to be focusing on a lot here in Florida, especially in St. John's and here in Duval, is the development. We have a very unique opportunity to look at like case histories of green space development as well as urban development. I'm going to try my best, and part of the last project here is going to be looking at a specific case history here in Jacksonville that maybe you drive by every day and doing a geotech report on it. But you guys are familiar with this area, you know, St. Johns County, I-95, 2014, there's nothing. It was just the Davises owning a bunch of land. And now, boom, like it just develops within 5-10 years. So just to give you a little like hint into the geotech's work here, like just let's look at this one little section and just this one little development down here. Like there are multiple geotechnical reports just for this one little development section. So with any project, you're going to need a geotech report. This is from ECS, which is a really good company. They did the pond design. They also do the foundation design. And I'll share these reports so you can go through and get a sense of what that end goal for a geotech consulting is. So for example, here, like you need to design, you'd work with the land development. I don't know who it actually was. It could have been ETM because they do it all the time together. But you'd work and establish, okay, like, so the developer wants to put this pond in this location. So then the geotech would be like, all right, sweet, let's go find out if we can actually put a pond there and where are the wetlands, and we'll go out and do drainage and boring. So these are the boring locations where they decided, all right, we're going to drill here, 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 here. We're actually going to test the soil and see if it's applicable to put a pond there. Like see if the soil will even absorb the pond or not. So those are all the different types of borings. Why do you think they did this many here in this pond?
They found good soil.
Found good soil, yeah. But the big picture is like, there's no answer. Like, I don't know why they did that. The engineer was just like, yeah, let's do one here. Let's do one here. Like, there's not like a standard saying a pond of this size must have X number of borings. It's all up to the engineer working with the owner and the client to discern what is the best and what amount of money they want to spend for it.
These plans are given to the like the geotech company before they go out there, right? Because are these plans already like looked over and they take the samples and
yep.
Where they might be.
Yeah, in this case, yeah, that is like they would have the residential layout already, but this is like a draft, you know, and then the geotech would go out like based off of this, yes, we can put the pond here. Maybe this boring right here is just all clay and non-absorbent, so they might need to change this pond design and add to this, you know, so it is an iterative technique with it. Yeah, so all that to say with this, like the typical geotech report, like even just for a small residential thing, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. We'll share a lot more about this too, so don't worry about looking at the details. But one of the things that they would provide is a boring profile. And this is how it is always shown. And this is going to be part of your first lab. We always show it with depth on the y-axis and then like distance on the x-axis. And the goal is to see how the soil changes with depth, as well as this right here. Does anyone know what that little logo means?
It's the boring was tough.
What about the little triangle?
Water.
Yeah, that's the groundwater table. Yeah. So that's one of the major roles of a geotech too, is to estimate or one, measure where the groundwater table is. And then also, do you want to, anyone know what that one is?
It's our surface of the water.
No, kind of. What's up? Yeah. Seasonal high water table. Anyone want to know how that's calculated? Or anybody know how it's calculated? Those are all correct answers because it differs from firm to firm. It differs from engineer. There's no like, it's all judgment related. They would look and see, all right, this was measured in January 10th. Like it hasn't rained, it's not a rainy season January 10th. So it's most likely not the high groundwater table. They would know what type of soil it is and just kind of like estimate based off of terrain. All right, we're going to bump it up 5 feet or 3 feet or something. But that seasonal high water table is really important, right? Because that's what they need to design the pond stages off of and everything. So there's a lot of judgment in there. And that's why every geotechnical engineering firm has like a bunch of white-haired dudes who have been in the business for a long time. And it's very important to learn from those people. Yeah.
That's the cost of if they wanted to pump them out instead, like pump the water out.
Well, if you pump the water out, you'd have to have a pump going 24/7, like because it's the groundwater table, so it's just going to come right back in natural. So we're dealing with something that we can't necessarily change.
So you just work out.
Yeah. So maybe you can't develop in this area. Maybe you need to add more fill to raise the elevation, or sometimes you just need to redesign someplace else. You guys talking about? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, it's the voodoo of geotech. All right, almost done here, guys. This is just some components of the reports. I'll share with you guys if you want to like go through and look through them a little bit more. But a lot of it is in that subsurface investigation and describing the things. And remember, these geotechs, you are giving your expertise in a consulting, you're sending this to the owner, you're sending it to the developer. Like, so the whole part of it is taking your knowledge and your professional background and making it so it's understandable and it's digestible for somebody who doesn't necessarily have that background. That's the hardest thing for an engineer to do, is remembering like you're doing these 4 years, doing engineering speak, you're doing all the things, you're like working only with engineers, and then you get to the workforce and you have to submit a report to somebody who has zero background in engineering. So you need to learn and know how to communicate effectively, tell them only the important information, and not complicate and not like scare them away with numbers. So it's kind of weird. In school, you're taught about like how to be precise and sig figs and all this stuff. That goes out the window when you start working in geotech. You're gonna round to the nearest 500 value here. Like, let's say this settlement here, you calculated it in class to be like 1.0857 inches. Like you never want to be too precise in geotech. You just say 1 inch. So you're going back and just rounding and using the significant figures in that case. All right, these are just other pictures just showing some of the other like geotechnical engineering designs. For this one, they had to design a cutoff wall just based off the elevation. So you also had to design that aspect of it. You had to do different tests, different permeabilities to make sure that the pond will drain effectively during high storm events. So that's part of the aspect too. So this is that map again at the very beginning that I shared. And just think of this moving forward. geotechnical engineering, the variability is insane. So a lot of this, the first part of the class and the baseline is understanding the site conditions and understanding the potential issues that we might have at each site. The benefit of that is it never gets boring. The other benefit, the other thing that kind of sucks about that is there's never a real answer, right? So like you always have to like paint a picture for your client, and there's always a lot of risk associated with that. So the whole art of geotechnical engineering is to manage and mitigate that risk. Since we have 5 minutes left, I want to share this example. There's a lot of like extreme types of geotechnical like issues based strictly off of the geologic condition, like that are very unique there. Like here in Florida, we have a very specific type of sinkhole that occurs here. That is only an issue in Florida because of our aquifer and our sand that we have. Kind of on a more catastrophic, larger scale, up in Norway and up in Canada, but where people don't live in Canada, they have this really interesting geologic formation that's called a quick or a sensitive clay. And it's really interesting, just to give you a long story short of how it is. Basically, the clay used to have salt water in its pores during the glacier periods, but whenever the glaciers melted, then all the fresh water included into it, and now there's fresh water in the pore space of the clay. And that just change in salinity changes the composition of the soil such that if you load this soil at all, then it behaves like a liquid automatically. So it goes from being very strong and competent to having zero strength very quickly. I'll see if this actually plays. The result of this are massive landslides at like a geologic scale. So what triggered this? This is a very famous one in Norway in the early 90s. What triggered this was a farmer going and just digging excavation for a cattle trough, like for water. And what that did was it caused a small landslide, and then that landslide pushed other soil out of the way, and that progressed and turned into another landslide, which turned into another landslide, and it just slowly progressed. So obviously in this area, the site investigation is super critical when it comes to this. Like you need to make sure that we actually understand everything. So I address that a bit. So this area, again, like if you work here in Florida, you don't have to worry about this. It's sweet. If this interests you, then you can go work in Norway or Sweden, and this is like one of the major issues they have there. Another thing that is very site specific, that's a little bit closer to home, are geologic conditions, these salt domes in Louisiana. So these are sinkholes on like a crazy large scale. It's a mine in Louisiana in the bayou area.
I got it.
These big plumes of salt that are like 600, 1,000 feet underground. And that's where we get like a lot of our Morton salt from. They actually like put these giant tubes in the ground and pump that salt up to the surface. Now, what happened with this one was they hit, when they were drilling, they hit a cavity underground in that salt mine. So what this did was this opened up the bottom of this lake to a cavity that's 1,000 feet below ground. So you have these 100-foot tall trees just getting sucked into this cavity as the lake drains into the subsurface cavity. So this might not necessarily be a geotechnical engineer's fault. This is more so on the mining side of things. But you can be very confident if you're a geotechnical engineer designing in this area, you need to know where all these salt dams are, so when you're drilling, you don't accidentally pop one of those cavities or mines underneath it, and then cause this catastrophic failure and progressing sinkhole. So this is called bayou pouring. If you just Google it, you can see there's a bunch of reports on a bunch of aerial imaging. They basically had to evacuate a whole town because this sinkhole was just growing and growing as the mine, 1,000 feet below ground, is just filling in with all the dirt and soil and water. It's pretty catastrophic. The other thing I'm just going to switch to, I mentioned this liquefaction. This is very common in like New Zealand, Australia, and in areas in like Japan, coastal cities that experience earthquakes. So if we had earthquakes here in Florida, this would be a huge issue. What this does is this causes the sand and the competent like roadway, everything we walk on, to behave like a liquid. And then whenever the shaking stops, it just traps everything back the way it is. This is the best video ever because it's all new, like shows how badass New Zealanders are. Just like, I still gotta take my kid to daycare. I'm walking. I was like, oh, we're just gonna pull in here, but you know, obviously, like for roadways, for infrastructure
We're just
normally
coming
on
to
this
check a
solid
couple of our
sand,
family members,
we
see
need
if
to
they're
design
alright, got
against
food
it
and
to make
water.
sure that if this were to happen, which earthquakes are happening pretty frequently now, that this doesn't just trap everything and destroy all the infrastructure. So you have your everyday geotechnical engineer, the person who designs the foundations,
We're
the
really
stormwater
quite
ponds and
strained, really.
everything. But you also
Road to
have
Bay, obviously.
these specialty sectors based off of the region. So here we have a lot of drainage, a lot of compressible soils, a lot of problematic soils with sinkholes. But like if this interests you,
Just come
and
from
like,
Brisbane
you know,
where they've
go
hit the
work in New
floods, and
Zealand, you have to deal with this stuff every
I'm
day
not
and
sure
design
which is
against
the
it.
worst.
Same with
We're not
where
really
you have
sure
these
where we're
different
going to go
certain
from
types
here.
of
If it rock and
site-specific
rolls
issues,
again
which is
tonight,
what I
we'll
think makes geotech
we'll think about
so
leaving.
interesting, because you have to worry about what the demands are of that specific area. Okay, so long story short, geotech, and by the end of it, you guys are, I'm going to be trying to convince you all to become geotechs. It's always going to be wide variety of work. It's a relatively young science, as I'd mentioned. Like the 1950s is when it became a legitimate engineering discipline. And one of the best quotes is, "There's no glory in foundations because most of the work is buried." So like that's kind of also the cool part about it. You spend all your time and energy designing something that like the public doesn't even know is there. And I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of behind the scenes. And you really only get your job known when something goes bad because then people see. So I'm excited to teach you guys this. It's a passion of mine, and it's really cool. Even if you're not getting into geotech, it's something that you're going to be working with. You're going to be building something that a geotech needs to design. So you're going to have, they're going to play a role in it in some way or the other. So I'll share this link, whatisgeotech.org. There's a few contractors who produce a lot of cool videos that help explain some of the different intricacies and the different things that we're going to be covering throughout the semester. Besides that, that's all I got for you. Next week, we'll talk more about the composition of soil. The only assignment due this week is that introduce yourself quiz. That is important because if you do not submit that, then I can't check you as attending, which means if you need financial aid, you might not get it. So please just submit that so I know you're not AI.